Hey, is George Kittle closing the gap on that #1 spot? It's getting close. Let's talk about some tight ends for Week 15. Hey, what's going on, everybody? Jake, Fantasy Headliners. Hopefully everybody's doing well out there. Today we're talking about tight ends here for Week 15. Got the top 15 tight ends here scrolling on the screen. We're going to run through them quickly here. Try to help you guys pick the best available option for your matchups here in the fantasy playoffs. I'm not going to waste a whole lot of time. Let's talk some tight ends. I talked about it in the opening, but it's still ever so close going to Travis Kelce as the #1 tight end here in Week 15. You just can't go against him. He's scored over 20 fantasy points in PPR leagues 3 straight weeks. He's the #1 overall tight end in all of fantasy sports. And now there's a chance that Tyreek Hill doesn't play. That's even more targets going Travis Kelce's way. I don't need to sell you on him. He's the #1 tight end here in Week 15. Number 2 is going to be George Kittle, coming off his absolutely huge game, 7 catches, 210 yards, and a touchdown. For a lot of teams, he either single-handedly carried you through your game last week or beat you by himself. Huge game for George Kittle, and it looks like I may get one bold prediction right from the preseason. Said George Kittle finished a top 5 tight end. Right now, he's number 3. Hang on for me, George. I need to get one of them right. But now he gets somewhat of a little bit more difficult matchup. The Seahawks are the 7th-ranked defense against opposing tight ends, giving up on average just under 9 points a game. However, this is George Kittle, and he doesn't care about opposing defenses. He's going to catch footballs a lot. Number 3 is going to be Ebron of the Indianapolis Colts last week against the Houston Texans. 4 catches, 65 yards, and another touchdown. Now has double-digit games all but 3 weeks this season. Definitely a solid play, one of the best tight ends in all of football, which is really hard to say because why? His name is Ebron, and a lot of people still equate him to what he did in Detroit, which was a whole lot of nothing. This just shows you what happens when you're in an Andrew Luck-led offense. As a tight end, he's going to feast, and he's going to feast a lot. Now he gets a matchup with the Dallas Cowboys, whose defense is playing great. However, if there's one weakness, it's against opposing tight ends. They're getting up on average over 14 points a game. Love Ebron again this week. Number 4 is going to be Zach Ertz, and really, if there were some more reliable options out there, he would be farther down this list. But realistically, he's got to stay in the top 4 for his usage and consistency throughout the season. I'm just a little bit worried now that Nick Foles will be under center for the Philadelphia Eagles. Zach Ertz is really not a Nick Foles guy. It's more of a Nelson Aguilar type of guy, maybe even more Golden Tate. The upside with Ertz is just limited. However, it's still higher than the remaining tight ends that are out there. He's still a solid play. It's a defensive matchup against the Rams, giving up over 13 points a game. It's still a decent matchup for Zach Ertz. It's just not as safe of a play as it would be if Carson Wentz was under center. Number 5 is going to be Gronk, and we kind of saw old school Gronk last week. 8 catches, 107 yards, and a touchdown. And I said it in my wide receiver video. I'll say it here in the tight end video. Tom Brady more than likely is not too happy the way they lost that game last week. And all the credit to the Dolphins. Yes, it was a lucky play at the end of the game, but a win is a win. Now, they're going on the road to play the Pittsburgh Steelers, one of their rivals, and I expect New England to come out firing early. Look for Tom Brady to be all over the field with all these weapons that he has. Julian Edelman, Josh Gordon, and yes, Rob Gronkowski have huge upside here for Week 15. Number 6 is going to be Jared Cook of the Oakland Raiders, somebody who's kind of on a little bit of a tear, I guess you could say. 4 straight weeks in double digits. Last week, 7 catches for 116 yards. That's now 2 straight games over 100 yards receiving. Kind of what we expect to see a lot more of this year with Jared Cook. That offense is just finally starting to get him more involved on a weekly basis. And now it's a decent matchup. The 21st ranked defense of the Cincinnati Bengals, giving up over 13 points a game to fantasy tight ends. I like some Jared Cook this week. They're finally starting to feature him, and he's somebody who has that safe floor, which you can't really say about a lot of these tight ends. Number 7, David Njoku of the Cleveland Browns, somebody who's been inconsistent at best the past few weeks. Last week, 3 catches for 35. However, we have now reached that point of the rankings where there's a lot of crapshoots, a lot of potential, not a lot of consistency. David Njoku is right there, but he has a great matchup this week. The 30th ranked defense against opposing tight ends. The Denver Broncos giving up over 15 points a game to fantasy football tight ends. However, look what happened last week against the San Francisco 49ers. George Kittle had a heyday against this defense. Can David Njoku do the same thing? Maybe not to that level, but he does have upside. That's why I have him as tight end 7 this week. Number 8, Cameron Brate. For the same reason we always talk about Cameron Brate, It's the touchdown upside. Not going to be one of these guys to go out there and get you 8-10 receptions a week. Last week, 2 catches for 12 yards. However, both of them were touchdowns. That's now 3 touchdowns in his past 3 games, and that's what he's there for. If they can get in the red zone, he's one of the top targets of Jameis Winston. Decent matchup. The Baltimore Ravens giving up over 13 points per game to opposing tight ends. They have had an opposing tight end score touchdowns on them 4 straight weeks. Looking good for Cam and Brate this week. I got him as tight end 8. Number 9 is going to be Austin Hooper of the Atlanta Falcons, somebody who we need to monitor throughout the week. He is questionable, been limited and missing practices here to start the week. However, pay attention to it. He's still a decent play here if he plays in Week 15. He's kind of been one of those solid guys, averaging right around 10 fantasy points a game. It is a difficult matchup, though. The 6th-ranked defense of the Arizona Cardinals against opposing tight ends only give up 8 points per game. However, if you're down at this point in the rankings, more than likely you're happy to get 8 to 12 points out of your tight end. They're all crapshoots. Like I said, it's a decent matchup. The Cardinals haven't allowed a touchdown for the last 3 weeks to opposing tight ends. However, they really haven't played a team that features their tight end, kind of like Austin Hooper is. Now, I'm not going to say he's featured in that offense, but he's included a lot more than the likes of Detroit, Green Bay, and the Chargers, which were the Cardinals' last 3 games. He's still a solid play. Just monitor those injury reports. Make sure he's good to go before you throw him in your lineup. Number 10 is the disappointment that is Trey Burton. And yes, a lot of people have been, upset with him as of late. Remember, though, last week, that was the first week back with Mitch Magic under center after missing a few games due to injury. And that was just an offensive nightmare for both teams. Trey Burton, 2 catches for 22 yards. Haven't completely given up on him, but it is a difficult matchup. The Green Bay Packers are the 4th-ranked team against opposing tight ends, allowing only 8 points per game. Haven't allowed a touchdown the last 3 weeks to an opposing tight end. However, I do expect this to be a little bit more of an offensive match than we saw last week with the Bears and the Rams. I do somewhat think that Trey Burton has top 10 potential, but it's iffy. So I got him sitting right there at number 10. Number 11 is going to be CJ Uzomah or CJ Uzomah of the Cincinnati Bengals, whichever you prefer. And it's kind of a crapshoot with him. But we're at number 11, right? None of these guys are overwhelmingly exciting to throw on your roster. However, he may be the most consistent of the remaining names. He's only going to get you right around 6 to 10 fantasy points a game. He hasn't had a touchdown since week 7. However, especially in PPR leagues, he's been somewhat consistent, right around that 8 to 9 fantasy points a week. And it's a great matchup for him this week. The 31st ranked defense against opposing tight ends of the Oakland Raiders. Travis Kelce tore them apart a few weeks ago. They're giving up on average 15 points per game. It's a decent matchup, a somewhat safe floor, just not a sexy pick. CJ Uzomah is tight end 11 in week 15. Number 12 fits right there in that same category. That's Vance McDonald of the Pittsburgh Steelers. Now, Vance has a little bit higher of an upside than Uzomah, but his floor is a little bit lower also. He's not always involved in the weekly game plan. It's always a lot of AB, Juju, and whichever running back is in the backfield at that time. Vance is kind of like option 3, 4, 5-ish, depending on the setup that they're in. He's just not overly consistent. However, his ceiling is higher. Last week against Oakland, 4 catches for 37 yards. Decent matchup this week. The Patriots giving up on average just over 13 points a game to opposing tight ends. Solid matchup. Inconsistent, though. Vance McDonald is going to be tight end number 12 for me here this week. Number 13 is a tough one to trust. It's Kyle Rudolph of the Minnesota Vikings. I'm really hoping that the change in offensive coordinator really tries to light a fire in this offense in Minnesota, because they should really be so much better than they've been performing here the past few weeks. Last week, Kyle Rudolph, a whole 2 catches for 7 yards, but wasn't a whole lot of offense to go around in that game either. He did have decent games the weeks prior, including week 12, 7 catches for 63 yards against the Green Bay Packers. Great matchup for him here this week. The Dolphins give up on average 14.3 points per game. They've given up 4 receiving touchdowns to opposing tight ends over their last 3 weeks. Really hoping, like I said, that offense takes a step forward. Kyle Rudolph is tight end 13 this week. Number 14 is Ian Thomas of the Carolina Panthers, and he would be higher up this list, but it is a difficult matchup. Ian Thomas coming off a great game, 9 catches for 77 yards against the Browns, but now he gets the Saints, and the Saints are the number 3 team against opposing tight ends, giving up only 8 points per game. However, last week against Tampa Bay, they did allow those 2 scores to Cam and Brate in the red zone. It's really hard to trust Ian Thomas. Why? It's really hard to trust Cam Newton at this point. I really think there's more to this shoulder injury than it's really getting out in the media. It's really limiting him at times. That's why Christian McCaffrey is just so involved. Cam Newton doesn't have to work that hard to get him the ball. Ian Thomas has huge upside, but it's a little bit worrisome with this matchup against the Saints. That's why I have him ranked right down at tight end 14. Number 15, and this one could fluctuate throughout the week. It really depends on the availability of Odell Beckham. It's Evan Engram right here at tight end 15. Last week, 3 catches for 77 yards. Hasn't had more than 4 catches in a game since week 8. Definitely not somebody who's overly involved in this offense. A lot of it because it's all Saquon Barkley and Odell Beckham. If Odell Beckham does miss again this week, there's a chance for some increased volume going Evan Ingram's way. That's why I have him ranked at tight end 15. Despite the tough matchup against the Tennessee Titans, currently the number 1 team against opposing tight ends, giving up only right around 7 points per game. They haven't allowed a touchdown to an opposing tight end all season. However, Evan Engram could see that increased volume, possibility for a touchdown there in that offense if Odell Beckham is not involved. Just pay attention to that. Like I said, Evan Engram, he may be replaced here at this number 15 spot later in the week. All right, those are my top 15 tight ends here for Week 15. Hopefully that was able to help you set your lineup. Got questions? Ask them below. Looking forward to the live show Saturday afternoon, 3:30 p.m. Eastern Time. Not very many of those left here for the season. Looking forward to talking to you guys. Have a good rest of your week. We'll talk to you later. Thanks. Bye.